Hello and welcome to another session of Not Your Average Bible Studies. My name is Allie with A. Marie Speaks, and this is a non-traditional reading and look at the New Testament. Matthew chapter 9 is where I'll be starting today. If you're new, welcome. Thank you for joining me. Thanks for taking the time to listen. As I mentioned, I am a non-traditional person and am reading the New Testament for the first time. I am looking for more of a metaphysical sense and deriving out the truths that I hear and speaking about them from a more unorthodox perspective. So if you're interested in hearing that for whatever reasons, thank you for listening, and that's what I'm offering. If you are looking for something that's more traditional or Christian-based, then feel free, to listen. But I don't have that quality of background. I've never been to traditional churches. I didn't grow up in that kind of setting at all. So that's not anything I'll have an influence or exposure to. Just as also a disclaimer or word of warnings, I'm totally probably mispronounce things. I might miss out on the most obvious meanings that are generally pushed in those scenes, places and scenarios, the places like typical churches and things. I might be missing kind of the main points that they talk about around these scriptures and verses. I'm aware of that. If you do have any of those, I'd love to hear them. If you come from a traditional background and you have some sort of input like that, I'd love to hear it. Feel free to send me emails or comments in below. It's always good to see comments of real live people, so we know there's actual organic people still communicating and using the internet these days here in 2025. Anyways, to get down to business, did I mention today is Sunday, March 9th, 2025, and we are at session number 14, and I'll be reading out of chapter 9, starting off with 9. If you're interested in any of the previous chapters, I have videos on those, but I'm going to just pick up exactly where we are at and not spend any more time sort of giving preambles. But thank you so much for your audience. Chapter 9. And he entered into a ship and passed over, and came into his own city. And behold, they brought him to a man sick of the palsy, lying on a bed. And Jesus, seeing their faith, said unto the sick of the palsy, Son, be of good cheer, thy sins be forgiven thee. And behold, certain of these scribes said within themselves, This man blasphemeth. And Jesus, knowing their thoughts, said, Wherefore think ye evil in your hearts? And now I'm going to stop and just talk for a minute here about, again, Jesus as a master of energetic service, and as well as an ascended master on the scope and spectrum of humanity's ascension, coming into this life as a sort of 100th monkey offering as to what a higher evolved human being, a more, what they're saying, they say 5D crystalline and, higher frequencies and on all this kind of stuff. But I do think some of that has a lot of truth behind it, but I also think that it gets a lot of hype and incorrect distortions around it. But I do believe here, as they said, he, knowing their thoughts, we have a telepathy, we have an interneted communication between all beings of the same social memory complex as in humankind. We do have these empathetic and sympathetic systems that read not only body language sort of visually, but there are unseen and unheard sort of frequency-based resonances that come through all of the time, and that we can all learn, and all of us are on a spectrum of gauging of, capability of understanding and translating these languages. Some of us choke them off and cut them out or ignore them completely. But I do believe in the case here that Jesus, had a more open connection or connectivity to that. And I've talked about this many times too, and whether or not this is something that it was more of an affinity and a gift and talent, that he was more connected and birthed that way, and then went off towards, the more Eastern traditions and learned more Vedic traditions and even sort of monk inner knowledge that comes and was very prevalent back then, but it comes from the inner practice of meditation. All of the heightening of his gifts and being able to cultivate them and really grow them in a fertile ground that would be those areas of teaching over there. Learning, the skills of his mastery, so to speak. And then coming back and being able to interact with people from his home space, his home city, these areas in the Middle East on a whole other level. It's very, doesn't seem so fantastical or magical really to me to take that into account and to hear that line of thinking, And again, I have heard other lines of thinking and the whole conspiratorial kind of thing, that he was never a person or whatever, or perhaps was a fake figment used as an anchor for negative agendas, and keeping those windows open as well. But I think no matter what lies and manipulations and distortions negative agenda wants to sort of try to wrinkle up the truth with, we can always iron it out, flush it out, and find real truth there, because they wouldn't be doing wrinkling if there was no truth to be had, right? There's a shirt here, there's no two ways about it. They haven't changed what's on the shirt by wrinkling it up or whatever. But I won't go too far into this metaphor anyways. Let's get out of too much of the backstory and just read the scripture, right? But one other thing before I go on in the other scriptures I did want to say is that the way that I really love this. He sees the man lying on a bed and seeing their faith, right? And same thing with he heard their thoughts. He can see the faith. There's qualities of truth that come through when we meet people, when we see them with clear eyes, heart, and mind, spirit, that sends these sort of knowings through us. And we get a chance and a glimpse at whether a person is full of faith or full of weakness, full of scarcity or full of abundance, full of lies or full of truth. And knowing, right? He knows so deeply the real truth cause of any disease. But they speak a lot about palsy and leprosy, of course. And it's like he knows the spiritual truth of disease is from the spirit into the mental and then to the physical. It's a 3-part growing, and it has its roots back in the spiritual layer. So he sees that the man is full of faith and knows that he's qualified or capable of healing because he has that good base within him. And that's why he says to him, be of good cheer, thy sins be forgiven thee. Because he knows that when we get sick inside because we hold on to these things, and we cause sickness ourselves by these ruminations of guilt and shame or anger or hatred, depending on what we're holding on to. But those full of faith, we can't hold on to hatred. There's guilt and shame and all of these other kind of morose, self-depleting and self-demeaning frequencies that we can get locked into and wrapped around. But faith is the opposite of well, not really, but it has opposite qualities of hate. There's a oneness to faith that comes with an unconditional love at the root of all things. And that's detrimental to hate. It sort of washes hate, it diffuses it or dilutes it, always. And so I believe, especially from seeing and knowing these kinds of truths, the way systems work, positive versus negative systems, to see someone inwardly faithful, you know they have an organic balance within their system, their toroidals, and that it's an incorrectness within the mental that is causing the disruptions to leak into physical. And he knows he can speak there to tell them they're forgiven, and that release of guilt and shame will cause release of holding on to the disease and get the inner body's army working positively to flush out the things that it needs to in order to heal itself, because bodies are innately known how to heal. It's that our minds blockade the healing, subconsciously or consciously, depends, and it happens in a multitude of ways. But these people, these others watching, right, behold certain scribes, and get into translations of who and what scribes are. Same thing with prophets, the Pharisees, and all these kinds of sort of common terminology of different characters of people at that time, different jobs, different backgrounds, points of positions in society that have names that maybe don't even anymore. Like we have the last name Smith now, but the people are not blacksmiths just because they have the last name Smith. But 500, 400 years ago, perhaps that was most certainly more of the case. And if somebody was called Smith, it was because they were of smithing background. And that comes with a quality and character, a family type, positions and purposes of, you can make judgments based on names. Small judgments, of course, not judging books by covers here. But nowadays, that's irrelevant almost completely, I would say. But who's to say what this scribe even means, right? But of course, I'm interpreting it as those who obviously don't understand the working of systems, and that they are more of observers from a mainstream general point of view. And perhaps even, clearly they have a bit of a negative mentality running their systems, because they have the audacity to try to judge another as to what blasphemy against source is. And of course it comes from a countered place of weakness, a threatened place of unworthiness from these people, because they are watching, taking notes on Jesus doing these great miracles, doing things that are sort of unfounded, or maybe even run contrary to what their belief patterns and ideologies and their traditions say are right and true. And that's, again, sticking negative, infringing thoughts on ultimate organic, positive happenings and encounterings. And that's even a stricter negativity. That's even more hardcore of a negative system happening there. And so, yeah, I think it's, I really love the way he even just points that out too. But I'm going to continue on. I'll repeat 4 and go on. And Jesus, knowing their thoughts, said, "Wherefore think ye evil in ye hearts? For whether it is easier to say, thy sins," yeah, thy signs. Oh my gosh, and I'm thinking of sine wave. Oh, and I just watched this other, I was listening last night to Santos Bonacci, and talking a bit about the Earth's function as a sine wave, and then can sort of backtracking about the etymology of sine and sin, and the invertedness of it. So yeah, that's a classic Freudian slip, and as in, my favorite way to say Freudian slip is even as a tip and a nod to that culture, the silly penguin parrots and their obsessions with Freud. I see Freud as a great inversion, and this big stuffed Lenin sort of fake puppet that they put up in order to use as a anchoring of negativity. They need more, they need confirmation of their validation to siphon energy off of those puppets out there. When you do the strict nod in the right way, and you pay quote-unquote homage to them in negativity, with their Freudian slip, and you think you're so smart because you're using the Freud the correct way, even though you know about him and all these things and his impacts and stuff. that's paying homage to their negative system, and you're giving negative energy, even if it's quote unquote positive love that you think you're giving respect or whatever to. They receive the frequency only at the level that they allow for their system there, and it is a negative one. It cannot be positive because it's a snared trap out there. And so, yeah, you're diminishing your light and love by giving it to that. Now, what I try to do when I say Freudian slip and to flip the inversion upright is to say, I don't give it two craps. If you are trying to do that pivot point, you're trying to ensnare me and catch me upside down here, step into your trap. I see your trap for what it is, and I'm just going to undo it and leave it as a piece of string on the ground so that nobody can step into it, because it's false. It's a liar's loop you've created here. It's unfair. It's an infringement on free will. And just by me approaching it and calling it for what it is, it unties that knot. It diffuses the threat and the potential of it being a trap anymore. And it just calls it for what it is. And so, yeah, I see the falsity of what he is, but I also know what the truth is about. Truth gets spoken out like that, right? The slips of the tongue is really kind of what we have dubbed that Freudian slip, and put this whole notion of Freud and his grotesqueness in his propaganda and all the matrix ties and loopings into him, into their virtual signaling and all that. But I don't care two bits for it, and I'm not pressing go on that button over there. In fact, I am highlighting the entire truth of the whole thing. So, catch the light off of it that you wish you might to try to run your little inverted system off of it, but I'm not playing that game, and I'm not pushing it for that reason. So, that be known. And anyways, let's read 5 correctly. For whether is easier to say, thy sins be forgiven thee, or to say, arise and walk? But that ye may know that the Son of Man hath power on earth to forgive sins. Then saith he to the sick of the palsy, arise, take up thy bed, and go unto thy house. I really love the way he's saying it doesn't matter the words that you choose. It matters the faith. It didn't matter that I say it quickly to him. He already understands what's being said, right? And the scribes want something more pleasant, this is what I'm assuming kind of is like, they want something more airy-fairy to write down, these kind of real ritualistic wordings, that it has to be some kind of casting of spells magically spoken, fancy wording that they have to write down, and then to see the man get up and walk, right? And I really love here too how he says, ye may know that the Son of Man hath power on earth to forgive sins. The Son of Man hath power on earth to forgive sins. And it's so funny because, especially as an outsider, to see sort of the appearance that gets put off by a lot of traditional churches and preachers and people that I have heard and I have gotten the gist of, is really that I think that they thought that Jesus was some kind of different human and not really human, and that he had more power than us, mere men or whatever. And that it was kind of like blasphemous, or it goes against their religion. It's like to say that, and yet Jesus is saying it right here, that all the power to forgive is the power to heal, and that all men have that power on earth. And anyways, going to 7, and he arose and departed to his house. But I'll just go on. But when the multitude saw it, they marveled and glorified God, which had given such power unto men. And as Jesus passed forth from hence, he saw a man named Matthew, sitting at the receipt of custom. And he saith unto him, Follow me. And he arose and followed him. And I love this. It's so short. It's so pleasant. It's just like, you have to, I feel, know that there's more to these conversations. There was a deeper conversation before him just saying similar to, he said to the fishermen at the start, come with me, and they left their nets and just came, right? I would love to hear more clearly, what those were. And it came to pass, as Jesus sat at meat in the house, behold, many publicans and sinners came and sat down with him and his disciples. And I wrote in my notes, I highlighted the sat at meat in the house. And I'm just wondering, like, whose house is the sat at meat? Means to sit down to eat, feast. Do they eat meat at a specific time only versus eating other foods differently? And I've heard very many sort of observations and picked apart different guidances and different gospels of Jesus as to what to eat and when. And I know, just as an outsider, just as a simple bystander, and I'm not going to make direct claims. I'm just seasonally and through the different feasts and traditions that happen throughout the year as markers as the year moves through its organic happenings and schedules. There are traditional meals that had different foods available at those times that were eaten, and perhaps, regular day to day in between those more traditional holidays that we call them today, but the gatherings and the feast times. There were other times, where they ate probably less of one thing and more of another due to the time of year seasonally and stuff. And it's if it wasn't so general, I would love to hear more specifics. But again, we're sort of left to interpret on our own and fill in the blanks a bit. But I really love this, and this is actually so great. This I read in a Lent. I forget if it was a sermon that I specifically listened to, or it was a reading online through our daily prayer. But we were talking about Lent, and it is Lent. And if you're doing Lent, know that you've got a friend who's as well doing that. First time ever that I've done it. And, I've heard of it before, sort of. And like I said, I'm not from a traditional background at all. But this year I was called to do that in a more deeper sense, a really spiritualistic sense, to step into fasting and to give up. I'm giving up sweet treats. It was something that I have talked before about fasting and struggles with food and what to eat correctly, what's good for the body and not, as well as because I myself, food plays a huge role on my wellness, and how I digest food plays a big impact on how I feel. So there's lots of foods that disrupt my well-being that I just cannot eat. And seeking wellness through that has been a huge part of my spiritual growth. But I had been sort of cutting out different things because it's not good for me, or is, but seeking a deeper reason to quote unquote be giving up certain things, or not allowing myself to eat certain things, passing and abstaining from certain types of foods has been such a big theme for me, and learning about it, that when I was reminded of what Lent is, and also different types of spiritual fasting, it's become, and Jesus talks about this quite a few times, and I think it's even been mentioned in Matthew a couple of times, that as his sort of teachings, to fast not with a sad face, not, oh yeah, that was in a couple of chapters, definitely, not to be seen, make yourself seen as in fasting, and to be really without something, and to be doing this harsh thing on yourself, but to do it in quiet, to not brag about it, to not make a big deal about it, but to do it as a service towards the Father, in secret, and as a partnership and a promise between you two, with full faith that the reasons that we are withholding those is a point of strengthening the self, to know that we don't need those luxuries, that underneath it, complete containment, contentment, nourishment, sustainment, all of these things are readily available to us, already given, and that those are foundational, and that foundation is true abundance and true happiness, true luxury and fulfillment, is the real sweet treat, is that savored item. And then if we return to them, this is what I really picked up this time about Lent, and feeling a great honing in, a tucking into it, and being able to really forego these things with a fulfillment that later on, if I do choose to go back to them, I can. It's not this detrimental, never again, pity party, oh boo-hoo over, I'm just not meant to be, have these good things. There's, I don't know, such weird things that come up when we choose moderation, when we choose to abstain from things, to fast, to be without. And yet, what comes up is something so much stronger that is always there, that you're within, that's part of you, that is always there. So it resonates really well with Lent, and let me read the actual verse now. Behold, many. Oh well, we'll go back to the start of 10. It came to pass, and Jesus sat at meat in the house. Behold, many publicans and sinners came and sat down with him and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said unto his disciples, Why eateth your master with publicans and sinners? But when Jesus heard that, he said unto them, They that be whole need not a physician, but they that are sick. Right? And with that, it's like, that's such a truth. It opens many questions. It's on one of those other times where I wish that I was there so that I could sort of ask deeper questions about that. But I'll put that, shelve it for a minute, I guess, so we can go on with the words that we do have here to speak on. Because he comes back, I love this. But go ye, and learn what that meaneth, and I will have mercy, and not sacrifice. For I am not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. It's kind of like he throws it right back in their faces. Well, if you're so high and mighty, and you've already done so much work, as to you want to deem these people sinners and heathens, and you wouldn't even sit down with them because you're so clean and pure, that they might dirty or taint you, is kind of the implications I feel that he's implying onto them, the accusations that he's sort of throwing onto them, and saying that it's kind of counterintuitive to what you're trying to put off if you're trying to say that you are a healer and here to bring assistance and help through your position, to take away sins and cast out devils or demons or whatever, the Pharisees and all those other sort of traditional religious position people claim to do and stuff, right? If they could really realize that those are the people they're supposed to be helping, not by chastising, criticizing, and demeaning them into some kind of submission, but instead lifting them up as peers and equals to help them learn to heal. He's trying to tell them to go learn that and then come back. And if they could understand that and their incorrectness of their poor position and observations, then, he wouldn't ask sacrifice out of them. He wouldn't see them as chaff in the wind, something that he's called to burn away. Right? But instead something that's worth saving, that's worth speaking to, that's, worth having mercy upon, so to speak. And I think he, again, this thing that he speaks of, he's not called to be, speaking in all the upper class places with all of the theologians and all of the academia world, and he's speaking against those, and in fact for like more of the masses, for those who've been casted out of there, for the sinners, the sick, in his humble place of knowing who he's here to help and serve. It's such a mastery point of understanding really system exchanges, really what the whole is. And no matter what your position or standing within the whole, your right and purpose is, that we interact with all parts of the whole equally. And in those equal interactions is where the true healing comes, where the real miracles are birthed from. I think I'm at a half an hour. So I might just leave it there, because I do have some it's a bit about what I talked about already about fasting and stuff. So maybe I will go on. We'll have a little bit of a longer one today. I'll conclude up with those thoughts with these couple verses. Then came to him the disciples of John, saying, "Why do we and the Pharisees fast off, but thy disciples fast not?" And again, this is a question I would come up with. This is something that's on my heart and mind. And like I had mentioned before about, is there correct times to be doing this, or is it, there's just so many questions. And Jesus said unto them, "Can the children of the bride chamber mourn, as long as the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken from them, and then they shall fast. No man putteth a piece of new cloth onto an old garment, for that which is put in to fill it up taketh from the garment, and the rent is made worse. Neither do men put new wine into old bottles, else the bottles break, and the wine runneth out, and the bottles perish. But they put new wine into new bottles, and both are preserved." This here, I have heard, many different observations and perspectives, translations about what this can mean, because I myself, as I was reading, and this is the first time I read these verses here, read a little ahead and come back to this, as I mentioned in a couple different readings here. It's relatively new for me, but I do read a little ahead in these before I come to each session to record, and ruminate on things, check out things that, but it's pretty much new for me, and like I said, I'd love to hear others' takes on these things, because nowadays, sort of in a verbatim direct translation as to maybe Jesus foreseeing his own crucifixion and death and understanding his direct role as symbology. Not in symbology, but as literal playing out of his life and what the symbol of his life is meant to be, and his disciples. But again, it doesn't seem correct in interpreting with context as Jesus to put himself in this sort of pedestal, pivotal position, as to say that once he dies, then literally other people should stop not eating because he is the bridegroom. Even though he's playing the role, metaphorically speaking, of the Last Supper and all that kind of stuff, like there's that very much display of the meaning of it. But underneath it, the metaphysical sense and the generic sort of templistic teaching here seems to be that there's a time for it and a time not for it. And when we recognize and awake into sort of the individuated sense on our own path of Christ consciousness, right, awakening to that within you, is that what he is saying, that then it becomes the correct time to fast. But when you're in a state of mind or in a place that you're not awakened yet, and you're more of that sort of collective hive mind, the society, you're not ready for it. You haven't had that sort of epiphany happen to you yet that will cause you to understand what eating really is, when we need to do it or when we don't need to do it, and what the energy about it really is. It's interesting conversations. I'm not trying to say I have any answers at all. I don't have any answers. In fact, I'm very much in the quest for listening to what they could possibly be and to seeking what is correct in my own world around those. I think it's a good place to leave it here for today, a good place for me to ruminate on in my own teaching, in my own path of studentship, to think about what these words mean, especially here in Lent on my Sacred Sunday, doing my own personal practices and rituals to really lighten and brighten my own connectivity to Source, to Christ, to the Christ consciousness within myself that I have a chance to embody and discover and explore. So thank you for listening to me here today. I hope you have a beautiful Sunday. If you are listening live, thank you so much for devoting some time here today for myself and for connecting to the big picture and to your great role within it. I'd love to hear your takes on it, your input, any sort of Lent conversations to be had. If comments or emails are always wonderful. Thank you in advance for those. And if not, hoping that it inspires conversations in your real world or work in your inner world, which is more important than anything. So thank you again, as I thank myself, and I will see you next Sunday.